Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the January 28th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: venture capital firms are increasingly backing NeoLab startups, which give priority to long-term research and developing new AI models over immediate profits. Major U.S. stock indexes ended mixed, with the S&P 500 and NASDAQ advancing 0.4% and 0.9% respectively, and the Dow falling 0.8%. The dollar notched its biggest one-day decline since April's tariff turmoil after Trump said he wasn't concerned about the recent slide in the currency. The global economy has shown unexpected resilience in the face of a series of shocks, with the U.S. recording another year of surprisingly strong growth, the World Bank's deputy chief economist said. SoftBank is in talks to invest up to $30 billion in OpenAI, adding to the Japanese conglomerate's already large stake in the startup. UPS said it expects to cut an additional 30,000 operational positions this year as the company reported higher quarterly profit. Stepped up production and deliveries of commercial jets helped fuel improvements in Boeing's business in the latest quarter. GM projected higher than expected cash flows this year and promised to return more cash to investors despite an unsettled tariff environment and a costly retreat from EVs. CBS News editor-in-chief Barry Weiss said the network is not producing a product that enough people want and called for a radical shift in how it delivers the news. United Health Group reported fourth quarter results and issued 2026 earnings guidance that were in line with lowered Wall Street expectations. American Airlines Group expects its long-term investments in premium services to pay off in 2026, its chief financial officer said. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. Border czar Tom Homan arrived in Minneapolis with immigration-related demands for Democratic leaders as he signaled the Trump administration wants to ease tensions there. Representative Ilhan Omar, a frequent critic of Trump, was unhurt after being sprayed with an unknown liquid by an attacker at a town hall meeting in Minneapolis. Trump defended Noem amid mounting criticism of the Homeland Security Secretary over her response to the latest killing in Minnesota. India and the EU reached a free trade agreement showing how the world's middle powers are expanding alliances in response to Trump's tariffs. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said he told Trump that he stands by his call to arms in Davos against economic coercion. Saudi Arabia ruled out the use of its airspace for a potential U.S. attack on Iran, complicating Trump's options to respond to Tehran's violent crackdown on protesters. TikTok settled a lawsuit that alleges social media platforms designed products meant to addict young people, avoiding a trial in California. The families of 2 Trinidadian men killed in a boat strike off Venezuela sued the U.S. in the first legal challenge to attacks Washington says are aimed at drug running. Yale extended its financial aid program to more families, exempting from tuition students from households earning up to $200,000. Spain said it would grant legal status to potentially hundreds of thousands of immigrants living and working there without authorization, bucking a trend toward harsher immigration policies elsewhere. Trump pointed to his support for agriculture during his first visit to a Farm Belt state since his administration announced a $12 billion package aimed at steadying the fortunes of struggling American farmers. The picture on today's front page shows a handcuffed man getting into a vehicle as a woman holding a young girl comes forward toward him. And that headline reads, "Tensions over ICE activity persist in Minnesota." The caption, "Fraught moment." A handcuffed man tried to flee Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents Tuesday in Minnesota, as a woman and child voluntarily went with them. The woman and child were later released. Articles from the front page follow. Trump border czar signals bid to ease tensions in Minnesota. Homan meets local leaders seeking concessions to trade for a drawdown, by Michelle Hackman, John McCormick, and Joe Barrett. Minneapolis. Tom Homan, the White House border czar, arrived here with a series of demands for Minnesota's Democratic leaders. Topping the list, an agreement from them to turn over more immigrants from the state's prisons and jails. People familiar with the matter said. Homan's task, the people said, is to secure what the administration can count as concessions from the state's Democrats in exchange for a drawdown of federal agents. The biggest notable change thus far is that both sides appear to be talking to each other, and the city's protests have been relatively muted. Homan met Tuesday with Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, 2 Democrats who have been warring with President Trump, and Greg Bovino, the Border Patrol commander who, until Monday, was tasked with carrying out the administration's controversial operation in the city. Bovino has since been removed and sent back to his old post on the southern border. Walz was one of the first to meet with Homan. After a meeting at the state capitol, his office said the governor called for impartial investigations into the Minneapolis shootings involving federal agents, a swift, significant reduction in the number of federal forces in Minnesota, and an end to the campaign of retribution against Minnesota. Frey said he told Homan that the city wouldn't enforce federal immigration laws. Trump gave a more upbeat assessment. "I hear that all's going very well," the president said of Homan's conversations with Walz and Frey. Homan's arrival was intended to mark a reset in the federal government's relationship with the state. He is seen as likely to wind down the large sweeping street arrest Bovino had been leading in favor of a more targeted approach. The earlier tactics prompted protest and led to 2 fatal shootings on city streets. Holman's model could set the tone for how federal immigration agents carry out enforcement across the country. His challenge will be to prove to the president that, even with a more low-key strategy, he can still deliver enough arrests and deportations to fulfill Trump's promise of a mass deportation. Representative Omar is attacked at Town Hall in Minneapolis. Representative Ilhan Omar was unhurt after a man charged at her and sprayed an unknown liquid on her Tuesday as she spoke at a town hall in Minneapolis. The attacker was tackled and taken into custody while the Minnesota Democrat continued her event. Medicare rate plan rattles health insurers. Big companies lose $96 billion in market value after flat increase proposal. By Anna Wild Matthews. Shares at big health insurance companies plunged on Tuesday after President Trump's administration proposed keeping Medicare payment rates roughly flat next year, wiping out $96 billion in market capitalization. Wall Street believed the administration was going to take a friendly approach to Medicare insurers. Now, investors think the industry might be in for a rough ride. Humana's stock skidded 21% on Tuesday, while shares in both CVS Health and Elevance Health dropped 14%. Shares of United Health, the biggest Medicare insurer by membership, dropped 20%. The decline weighed on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, in which United Health is included. United Health also reported quarterly results, booking hefty charges and issuing a soft revenue outlook. These guys definitely have a case of whiplash, said John Gorman, a longtime consultant to the healthcare industry on Medicare issues. Shock and dismay is a lot of what I'm hearing. The Wall Street Journal first reported on Monday that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, was proposing 2027 Medicare insurer rates well below analyst expectations. The proposal dealt a blow to insurance companies that have been pushing to turn around a business that is central to their finances and hopes for growth. Medicare Advantage, the private insurer version of the federal program for older and disabled Americans, generated an estimated $500 billion in revenue for the industry as a whole last year. For industry giant United Health, revenue from the overall Medicare line of business is more than twice that from private insurance. Such revenue was long a key driver of growth and profits until recent retrenching, partly due to a Biden administration policy that trimmed some lucrative billing practices. If the 2027 rates are skinnier than insurers think they should be, the industry will likely turn to a playbook companies deployed this year as they sought to bolster margins. Medicare enrollees might see insurers pull back some offerings, trim extra benefits such as cash-like cards used for health expenses, and offer plan designs with more cost controls, such as a limited networks of doctors and hospitals. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. GOP's $100 billion tax bet, more refunds, more votes, by Richard Rubin, Washington. Republicans and President Trump designed their tax cuts for this moment, creating a refund bonanza that will land in bank accounts well ahead of the midterm elections. The annual tax filing season that opened Monday will produce a cash surge estimated at $100 billion beyond last year's $329 billion total, and it is engineered to buoy Republicans' sagging voter approval. Public confidence in Trump's economic leadership has slumped, and better than expected growth hasn't overcome America's anxiety about the cost of living and a slowed job market. At stake is whether Republicans can retain narrow House and Senate majorities that give them the authority to control the federal agenda and prevent investigations of Trump. The tax policy strategy is simple. Put money in voters' wallets and get rewarded at the polls. In reality, it is a double bank shot with little guarantee of success. U.S. breakup is hard for Europeans to do. By Tom Fairless in Frankfurt and Kim Mackerel in Brussels. European capitals closed ranks to push back against President Trump's bid to control Greenland, but the continent's dependence on the U.S. for security, exports, and technology mean decoupling from its ally isn't an option. The reliance puts Europe at a disadvantage in a world of great power competition and weakens its hand in negotiations with Trump on everything from trade to Greenland and Ukraine. For decades, Europe has relied on the U.S. for security, Russia for energy, and China as a growing export market. Now it depends on the U.S. for all three. Today, the European Union sends about 1/5 of its exports to the U.S., its biggest international market, and relies on the U.S. for around 1/4 of its natural gas supplies. The largest U.S. military base in Germany has more soldiers than the biggest German base there. It isn't just energy, trade, and security. Europe relies on U.S. technology and financial services. Visa and MasterCard control about 2/3 of card spending in Europe. Around 80% of German companies said they rely on U.S. digital technologies and services, according to a recent survey by the Berlin-based digital lobby group Bitkom. These dependencies around technology, around security, around finance, and the dollar, that's the glue that's now keeping together the Western Bloc, said Neil Shearing, chief economist at Capital Economics in London. What's become clear is that the U.S. has enormous leverage over that relationship. The EU has sought to diversify its trading partners over the past year in an effort to curb its reliance on the U.S. It announced a sweeping free trade deal with India on Tuesday and earlier reached a landmark agreement with 4 South American countries. Leaders in Europe and Canada point to new alliances among middle powers as a way to break the dependency, but those partnerships would likely still lean heavily on the U.S. for defense, finance, and access to advanced technologies, Shearing said. No sales, no product, no problem. AI investors still eager, by Kate Clark. Ben Spector had an unusual pitch for investors last fall. A PhD student at Stanford University with a highly prized artificial intelligence background, Spector had no near-term plans to make money and no traditional pitch deck. He didn't even have an idea for a hit AI product. What he did have was a lab called Flapping Airplanes, a novel idea for training AI models, and a zeal to hire talented young researchers eager to tackle AI's biggest problems. Venture capital firms jumped at the chance to back him. Small teams of brilliant young people that are able to look at the problem in a new way, those are the kinds of organizations that actually win, said Spector, 25 years old. Flapping airplanes, a reference to the biological cues future AI should take from nature, is part of a new wave of startups some have dubbed Neo Labs, which give priority to long-term research and developing new AI models over immediate profits. The interest in Neo Labs has skyrocketed as investors hunt for the next OpenAI, which began as a research lab and later became one of the world's most valuable startups. A large subset of top AI researchers believe that models such as ChatGPT and Claude have effectively hit a dead end and will never reach a level of intelligence that matches or exceeds that of humans. While there are more than 1,000 startups with valuations of $1 billion or higher, the number of Neo Labs is generally believed to be in the dozens, according to researchers and investors. There's a graph on the front page titled Population Growth Slows. Because of immigration restrictions, U.S. population growth slipped to 0.5%. Carney, I meant what I said, by Paul Vieira, Ottawa. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says he spoke to President Trump on Monday and told him he stands by his remarks last week, issuing a call to arms among smaller powers against economic coercion. This marks the latest uptick in trade tensions between Ottawa and Washington, as U.S. officials prepare a formal review of the North American Trade Treaty that Canada relies on to ship exports to the U.S. on a largely duty-free basis. Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, didn't identify the U.S. or Trump, but widely was interpreted as a rebuke to Trump's policies on using U.S. economic and military might to achieve geopolitical goals. To be absolutely clear, and I said this to the president, I meant what I said in Davos, Carney said Tuesday about the 30-minute call with Trump. It was a wider set of issues, and Canada was the first country to understand the change in U.S. trade policy that he initiated and we're responding to that. The Canadian leader's remarks Tuesday were meant to rebut comments from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Bessent told Fox News on Monday that he was in the Oval Office when Trump and Carney spoke by phone, and Carney was very aggressively walking back some of the unfortunate remarks he made at Davos. The call unfolded days after Trump threatened Canada with 100% tariffs should the country enter into a free trade deal with China, the U.S.'s biggest rival. Ottawa and Beijing reached a trade détente in which they agreed to reduce tariffs on China-made electrical vehicles and Canadian agricultural products. Carney said he spoke to Trump about how Canada is diversifying its trade abroad, and I explained to him our arrangement with China. Carney and other senior Canadian officials have said they have no interest in pursuing a free trade pact with China. Gulf moves hurt U.S.'s Iran plans. Saudi Arabia ruled out use of its airspace for a potential U.S. attack on Iran. By Michael R. Gordon, Shelby Holliday, and Alexander Ward. Saudi Arabia on Tuesday ruled out the use of its airspace and territory for a potential U.S. attack on Iran, complicating the Trump administration options in response to Tehran's violent crackdown against Iranian protesters. The Saudi move follows a similar statement Monday by the United Arab Emirates Foreign Ministry. The statements from the two Gulf states represent a foreign policy setback for the Trump administration as it seeks to ratchet up pressure on Tehran, which has defied Washington's demand that it end uranium enrichment and the end of suppression of protesters. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the kingdom's de facto leader, outlined his country's position while talking by phone with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. A Saudi readout of the Tuesday call said that the Crown Prince had stressed that the kingdom will not allow its airspace or territory to be used for any military actions against Iran. Saudi Arabia is worried about being drawn into a conflict with Iran, which attacked the kingdom's oil facilities in 2019 during President Trump's first term in office. Both Saudi and the United Arab Emirates have been targets of attacks by Iran and their proxies. A degraded and less threatening Iranian regime is in their interest, but they worry about regional unrest and Iranian retribution and don't want to be the tip of the American spear, said Karim Sajapur of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. EU and India reach deal on free trade. Agreement will link nearly 2 billion consumers across the two economies. By Kim Mackerel and Tripti Lahiri. India and the European Union have reached a free trade agreement that will open a new market for European cars and other products, showing how the world's middle powers are expanding alliances in response to President Trump's tariffs. The deal, announced on Tuesday, is set to link nearly 2 billion consumers across the two economies, making it the biggest free trade agreement by population that the EU has concluded. It is the mother of all deals, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said at a meeting in New Delhi. It is the latest example of U.S. trading partners seeking to curb their reliance on the U.S. by expanding ties with other markets. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, a big social media shakedown. The plaintiff bar says media platforms are liable for adolescent ills. Plaintiff attorneys never let a cultural problem go to waste. This week, a bellwether trial begins in a flurry of lawsuits that seek to hold social media platforms liable for sundry adolescent problems. Stories of psychological spirals are sure to elicit sympathy, but this trial lawyer raid won't help teens. More than 3,000 personal injury lawsuits against social media platforms have been filed in California State Court, and another 800 are pending in federal multi-district litigation. State attorneys general and school districts have brought claims against companies seeking compensation for cost of dealing with adolescent mental health. In the trial that starts this week in Los Angeles court, a 19-year-old plaintiff claims that Google's YouTube and Meta created design features such as public likes and frequent notifications that resulted in compulsive use, depression, self-harm, and body dysmorphia. TikTok and Snap settled the case in recent days. The first problem with these cases is that Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act says Internet platforms can't be held liable for user-generated content. The plaintiffs plead around that law by arguing that the defendants were negligent in the way they designed their platforms and should have warned users about their addictive potential. They also point to studies that find an association between adolescent social media use and mental illness. It's hard to dispute a population-level link between teens getting access to social media in the late 2000s and a subsequent increase in psychological problems, especially among girls. But it's extremely difficult to prove that social media caused any individual's troubles, given the complex interplay among personal experience, personality, and online exposure. For instance, the plaintiff in the current case was exposed to domestic abuse in her home as a young child, which may have made her more vulnerable to content on the platforms. Individuals with compulsive personalities are at higher risk for mental illness, and they may also be more likely to become addicted to social media. Studies also find that parenting style is a crucial mediator in the relationship between social media use and mental health. Such confounding and mediating factors undermine the plaintiff's claim of causation. The companies argue that the relationship between time that teens spend on their platforms and mental illness is weak. A study published in the Journal of American Medical Association Pediatrics this month found a U-shaped association between after-school social media usage and emotional well-being among Australian adolescents. Young adolescents who use social media the most were 3 times as likely to score as having lower well-being than moderate users. However, older teens who didn't use social media were 80% more likely to have low scores. Social media's association with adolescent well-being was complex and non-linear, varying by age and sex, the study concluded. That's no doubt true, and it's one reason these cases don't belong in court. The lawsuits also seek to erode Section 230 protection by making platforms liable for user content, much of which isn't harmful per se. Photos of friends looking happy may cause a girl to feel depressed. Platforms would also become liable for social bullying, which they can't control. The companies say they have stepped up parental controls and teen privacy protections. If Congress and states don't think those measures go far enough, they can pass legislation. Some states have required age verification and parental consent for teens to use platforms. These lawsuits will benefit no one but trial lawyers looking for another jackpot. Mikey Sherrill's New Jersey power play. The new governor wants price controls that will reduce energy supply. The new Democratic governors of Virginia and New Jersey are worth watching as a signal of what the party has learned from its 2024 drubbing. New Jersey's Mikey Sherrill kicked off her governorship last week by declaring rising electricity rates a state of emergency. They're not, but her proposals could increase the risk of power outages. Ms. Sherrill used her maiden speech to lay out her plans to ease electric rates. In short, you are sick of the status quo, she said. Well, guess what, guys? So am I. Guess what? Her proposals are more of the same progressive policies that have fueled higher prices, subsidies, mandates, and price controls. Rising electric rates were a major campaign issue in New Jersey's gubernatorial race last year. The state's rates spiked 22% last summer and have risen more than 50% over 5 years. As these columns have warned, retirements of base load power plants have constrained supply at the same time as demand is increasing from data centers. 5 large coal plants and 1 nuclear reactor in New Jersey have shut down since 2017. Much of the blame owes to federal emissions regulations, state climate policies, and rich federal green energy subsidies that have made base load nuclear and coal plants uneconomic. Recent 2-term Governor Phil Murphy required that 100% of state power come from clean energy by 2035. New Jersey also participates in a regional cap and trade program that requires fossil fuel plants to pay fees which are passed on to consumers. The state uses revenue from the program to subsidize green energy and reduce utility bills for lower-income customers. Fees are expected to increase in coming years as the program ramps up. Ms. Sherrill proposes to use this revenue windfall for ratepayer relief to offset the cost to lower-income consumers of anti-fossil fuel policies. This is income redistribution in disguise. If there are power shortages, insulating consumers from higher prices discourages conservation. Higher prices are a market signal that helps curb demand and encourage more supply. On the latter, she has little to offer. She suggests easing regulation so solar plants can be built faster, which is fine as far as it goes. But solar can't provide reliable power all day and every day, even if paired with batteries, which typically discharge power for only 4 hours at a time. Her worst idea is a pause on utility rate increases or cost recoveries to the extent permitted by law. This is a price control that will reduce grid investment, including in new supply. Utilities in New Jersey procure power from independent generators and pass on wholesale power prices, along with their costs for transmission and distribution to customers. If utilities can't pass on their cost, they will skimp on maintenance. It's that simple. New Jerseyites can look forward to more power outages and longer delays to get their lights back on. When that happens, Ms. Sherrill will blame the utilities. The governor campaigned as a moderate, but her opening policy salvo looks like standard progressive fare dressed up as reform. From the opinion pages, Venezuela can learn from an Iraq mistake. The Pentagon rejected our plan to pay Iraqis an oil dividend. By Peter McPherson. President Trump has an opportunity to help stabilize Venezuela at no cost to Americans by avoiding a mistake from post-invasion Iraq. In 2003, a few months after the invasion, the Coalition Provisional Authority of Iraq, of which I was Director of Economic Policy, persuaded Iraq's governing council to give some of the country's oil money in equal amounts regularly paid to all citizens living in Iraq once total oil production had increased enough. Giving Iraqis a stake in their nation's well-being could have bolstered the country's stability and economic strength. Doing so in a transparent trust fund, as Alaska has done to pay its residents an oil dividend since 1982, would have strengthened accountability and democracy by allowing citizens to know what was happening to their assets. Unfortunately, the Defense Department didn't approve, and our initiative died. But it could be born again in Venezuela, to its people's benefit and Washington's credit. Giving Venezuelans equal dividends from their country's oil profits would put immediate cash in their pockets to buy food and medicine and to start rebuilding their lives. Long term, it would help them shift from vassals of a corrupt regime to owners of their own future, a future that could bring back Venezuelans living abroad. A fund with clear rules, independent oversight, and public reporting would have the additional benefit of preventing old Maduro cronies from looting the country's wealth behind Mr. Trump's back. The White House has taken the necessary first step by creating a Venezuelan oil trust fund managed in Qatar. If the president now directs the fund to send dividends to every Venezuelan, he will have cemented a historic legacy. Generations of Venezuelans would remember and appreciate Mr. Trump's actions. The concept is straightforward. Venezuelan oil revenues would continue to flow into the trust fund, whose assets and payments would be transparently published online. Every Venezuelan citizen still living in the country would receive a quarterly dividend based on a set share of the fund's income. Biometric identification and traceable digital payments would help ensure the money went to the right people. This policy would help the U.S. meet its strategic objectives by stabilizing the Venezuelan economy and signaling a decisive shift away from a socialist autocracy to a system in which people are able to spend their own money. This would help entice investment too. Mr. Trump wouldn't need to wait for Venezuela's broken state to rebuild or risk funds passing through the hands of Caracas officials. Announcing dividends for Venezuelans would also disprove accusations that the U.S. is stealing oil. It would be clear that Mr. Trump supports the Venezuelan people and their future, and it wouldn't cost a dime of U.S. taxpayer money. Mr. McPherson served as Director of Economic Policy for the Office of Reconstruction and Humanitarian Assistance in Iraq, 2003, and Deputy Treasury Secretary, 1987 to 89. He is a former chairman of Dow Jones and Company, which publishes the journal, and President Emeritus of Michigan State University. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Is a 4-year degree worth it? If colleges and universities want families to answer yes, they'll need to make some changes on campus. By Sean Leah Baylock, Hanover, New Hampshire. Families across the U.S. are questioning whether a 4-year degree is worth it. Student debt has soared. Recent graduates are struggling in a rapidly changing job market. Colleges can also be too ideological. On many campuses, students are exposed to a limited range of perspectives, signaling to them what rather than how to think. American higher education has a trust problem. We shouldn't pretend otherwise, and it won't solve itself. In 2026, I'd like to see colleges and universities across the country take steps to restore trust. As president of Dartmouth College, I'm committed to this goal and how to restore public confidence in higher education animates conversations among my presidential peers. Assuming that most Americans value our mission is a recipe for irrelevance and decline. We must demonstrate to students and families and to the broader public that we've heard their criticisms and will address them. I see 5 areas where we can build back trust. First, make college affordable. If the public no longer believes it is a good investment, that's a problem. Solving it starts with lowering the cost. Every leading university needs to demonstrate a measurable commitment to affordability. At Dartmouth, we have replaced loans with a combination of scholarships, grants, and work-study options in our financial aid packages, and now offer free tuition for families earning $175,000 or less. This model is expensive, but it's worth every penny, if we want lower and middle class families to see a 4-year degree as within reach. Dartmouth is fortunate to have generous alumni who provide funding that makes programs like this possible. Second, the return on investment matters. Affordability isn't enough. A college education is one of the largest investments a family will ever make, and there must be an undeniable return. Institutions should be held accountable for student outcomes. Are our graduates getting jobs, pursuing meaningful work, and contributing to their communities? At Dartmouth, we're moving toward a guarantee, a paid internship or comparable experiential opportunity for any student who wants one, supported by 4-year career and life planning programs that begin during freshman year. Other schools have different models. The University of Tulsa commits to making sure that students who participate in a career development program either land a job or get accepted into graduate school. Curry College takes responsibility for its students' loans for up to 12 months or provides a paid internship or free graduate school credits if graduates aren't employed. Colleges and universities should all embrace the same principle. We own the return on investment, not only the tuition bill. Third, recenter higher education on learning rather than political posturing. Too often, colleges and universities have participated in the culture wars. The result is an environment in which students and faculty feel they must toe an ideological line rather than explore ideas that fall outside prevailing norms. Our institutions must reclaim a narrower, firmer sense of our role. That means embracing institutional neutrality or restraint, as we call it at Dartmouth, on issues that don't directly affect our mission or core functions. When we, as institutions, rush to issue statements every time there's a national or global controversy, we signal there's a right position and that opposing views are unwelcome. We must ensure that students can encounter the best arguments, assess evidence, and reach their own conclusions. That requires a campus culture where controversial speakers are heard rather than canceled, where disagreement is expected rather than feared, and where people can explore ideas without being defined by them. The infrastructure for this already exists. It's the classroom. Universities must double down on supporting faculty who provide structured opportunities for disagreement on complex issues and provide clear protections for faculty, staff, and students who voice unpopular views. On my campus, Dartmouth Dialogues promotes discussion across differences. Promoting healthy debate isn't a partisan project. It is the precondition for any serious education. Fourth, emphasize equal opportunity, not equal outcomes. One quiet way we're undermining trust is by erasing meaningful performance distinctions. Grade inflation, especially at elite universities, reduces a transcript's significance. Employers notice, so do students. When an A is the default, it stops meaning excellent. It means I showed up. We must be willing to reintroduce differentiation. That could include policies like forced medians, distribution guidelines, or being transparent about grades given. Recently, our faculty voted to keep median grades on students' transcripts because they believe that more information is better than less. Ours is the only Ivy League school that does this. At the same time, we must defend a genuine meritocracy of ideas. Research funding, faculty hiring, and academic recognition should be grounded in scholarly excellence, not ideological litmus tests. Fifth, testing is important. Dartmouth was the first Ivy League university to reinstate an SAT/ACT requirement after a test optional period during the COVID pandemic. We did so because a study conducted by our faculty showed that tests are a valuable tool for identifying high-performing students who might otherwise be overlooked. Yes, test scores are imperfect. All measures are. Test performance is correlated with family income, but it turns out that recommendation letters and summer experiences are even more so. Taken as part of a holistic applicant review, test scores help us fulfill the American promise of upward mobility based on talent and effort. Meritocracy and diversity aren't at odds. Next month, I'll join other university presidents at a summit in Washington, hosted by the Association of American Universities, to continue the conversation about how universities can take responsibility and be held accountable for our actions. I hope we'll move beyond defensiveness and talk of federal compacts and instead take action. We should leave the table having made specific commitments. We won't agree on everything. One size won't fit all. But we must agree that the status quo is untenable. If we're willing to reform ourselves, to listen, change, and recommit to our core mission, we can again be a trusted engine of the American dream, scientific breakthroughs, and the global economy. This work can't wait. It starts now with us. Miss Baylock is president of Dartmouth College. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the January 28th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful day or evening.